All right, I want to talk about the supply side of the market. Supply is different in demand in that price, here's quantity, in that price and quantity are positively correlated. So a supply curve looks like this. As the price rises, sellers, suppliers are willing to supply a greater quantity because they're going to make more money. As the price falls, they're less willing to supply large quantities. So, but as with demand, supply, the whole relationship between various quantities supplied at various prices, is the same thing as the supply schedule and the supply curve, which is a picture of the supply schedule. Supply is not, however, the quantity supplied. Quantity supplied is a point on the curve, a point in the schedule. Now, fortunately, the things that the determinants that shift the supply curve are even simpler than with demand. First of all, price. As with demand, price does not shift supply. A change in price only results in a movement along the curve. It does not result in a new curve. However, as with demand, some price-related things will shift the curve. The first is input prices, ingredient prices. For example, sugar, an input in ice cream. How does the price of sugar affect the supply of ice cream? Well, let's say the price of sugar goes up, our variable increases. Now, remember, supply, think about sellers, think about the sell side. If the price of sugar goes up, am I more or less likely to sell ice cream? I'm less likely to sell the same quantities of ice cream at the same prices because it's less profitable. So when the input prices go up, the supply is going to shrink, to shift to the left. And that makes intuitive sense. Price of sugar goes down, then the supply of ice cream will likely increase because it's easier to supply it. The second determinant is technology. And let's talk about, for example, robots building cars. Let's say the technology, robot car building technology is the variable, goes up. What does that do to the supply of cars? Pretty intuitively, it's going to be easier to supply them. In fact, if you think about it, this and this are sort of the same thing because an increase in technology results in input price decreases. Got more robots, can pay less for labor. The result for supply is the same, increased supply. Notice we don't worry about this over here because it's unlikely we'll have a decrease in technology unless we have like the fall of Rome in the Dark Ages or the asteroid hits or something like that, so we're not going to worry about it. The only determinant that shifts supply curves, that also shifts demand curves, the only one they share is price expectations, except it works in the opposite. So let's talk about price expectations. How does the expectation of a future price affect the supply of ice cream today? Okay, so let's say that we expect ice cream to be more expensive next month. Now remember, we're sellers, okay? So what does that do to the supply? It decreases it. It's kind of the opposite of what happens on the demand side, because if I think ice cream is going to be more expensive next month, I'm going to pull more back into the freezer, sell less today so I can sell it next month and get those high prices. Conversely, if I think the price of ice cream is going to be a lot lower next month, I'm going to open up the freezer and put a guy holding a sign out on the sidewalk to drag people in to sell my ice cream. I may lower the price. Or may provide incentives. I'll supply more ice cream today if I think it's going to be cheaper tomorrow. It's kind of the flip side of how price expectations work on demand. And finally, the number of sellers. Let's say suppliers enter or exit the market. Let's say they enter the market. For example, there are only 2 companies in the world that build jumbo jet airliners. Let's say a third one enters the market. The number of sellers goes up. What does that do to supply? Pretty logically, it increases it. And if a seller leaves the market, there are fewer sellers equals lower supply, and that too makes intuitive sense.